Okay, good morning, everybody, to the Nairnshire Area Committee, and it's to consider a grant application. I believe we've apologies from Mark. Is it?
It's Chair. Apologies from Councillor Fraser, who has stated to be running late this morning, so he will not be in attendance.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Mark. And I think we'll just go to beginning. We'll get some background from David Haas. David, if you could give us some background to the matter.
Excuse me, Chair. Excuse me, Chair. Could I just double check item 2 that we have no declarations of interest? Thanks very much.
No. I have no declarations. Apologies. I have no declarations of interest.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
David.
Chair, thank you very much, and thank you, Chair and members. You have before you at this special meeting of the Nairnshire Area Committee a single application for consideration. It is exceptional because the Nairnshire Area Committee and Nairnshire Common Good Fund, to which this application has been made, does not have a grants budget. This is an exception based on the fact that the asset in question is of great importance to the people of Nairnshire, and I'm sure, Chair, you will be saying more of that and members as we go through this. So on that basis, the report invites you to consider the application, which is from the Board of Trustees of the Community Centre for specific financial support, noting their immediate financial need, which was only intimated to us very recently, and more to that will follow from my colleague Mark Gregg, your Community Development Manager, shortly. Whilst the application is competent, it does highlight some considerable financial pressures that the centre is under. And if members were minded to consider approving an award of grant, all in terms of the application, officers will make recommendations regarding a number of conditions which would be implemented and which would ensure that the usual process of achieving best value for the Common Good Fund would be achieved, and that the investment would see the best chance of success to bring the centre back into a stable condition. Chair, I don't have any questions any further points to make at this stage, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you. And just to point out, other than that, to note the status of the budget that presently exists within the Nairnshire Common Good Fund, which could sustain this grant, but as I say, subject to recommended conditions if you were minded to approve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. I see Councillor Oldham has got his hand up. Councillor Oldham.
Yes, thank you, David. Are you intending to lay out the conditions you're proposing before we go any further?
I could certainly, if that was the wish of the committee, I could certainly do that. If that would give you more security in terms of your discussion, we could certainly set those out. If that was your wish, Chair, it's absolutely no problem at all. But perhaps before going into that debate, you might wish to hear from Mark as well in terms of the circumstances surrounding the application, but happy to do so. Thank you.
Okay. Paul, yes, we're going to hear the conditions from David when we discuss the recommendations. I was wanting to actually put a bit more into the background before we come on to the debate and the discussion ahead of the recommendations. This came to us at very, very short notice. You could say within a month, I think, is a fair time frame. I would say that officers, and Mark especially, has brought this together at very, very short notice, the paper, and we're very appreciative of that. And especially the community consultation. That's very much appreciated. Obviously, we'd like this to have gone to the community engagement group, but because of the short, the nature of the emergency, shall we say, it was intimated that the centre would be filing for insolvency in a matter of weeks. We couldn't really go through the new processes with the Common Good Engagement Group. So all credit to Mark for pulling this together at short notice, especially the community engagements. The second point I'd make on the background to this is it's not really an option for Highland Council to provide short-term funding, because it would have opened the floodgates, and they would have been inundated, because I know there are many organisations that are in similar conditions and facing similar challenges. So the short-term option was not one that would have been successful with the Highland Council. Longer term we can discuss towards the end of the discussion and the debate when we come to look at our recommendations. But that's the 2 points I wanted to make. And I would say the same thing would apply to the Nairn Common Good. We're not in the position to accept invitations across the board now. We have a very tightly controlled budget, and we have allocated small amounts of money here and there for various projects that go through the Nairnshire Committee. So it's not that we're opening the gates for one and all. It's not. So I would look to open up on the debate and the discussion, and go to Paul or Barbara if they wish to make any comments on.
So you're going to go to Mark next, I thought.
I'm going to go to Mark. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. It was from my side as the officer. It's just really to outline the centre's contact with myself, and obviously how we took things forward. You know, they came to us sort of back end of April with the potential issue here, and you know, all the discussions that we had were to support the centre with you know, to look to support with financial help. Which is obviously embedded through this application, and obviously the application that's come forward it follows the representations from the centre, and the application was made to yourself. So this has been a sort of a discussion, as you say. It's been a short discussion, but you know, what's presented today outlines the representation of the current status, and obviously, as you've outlined yourself, you know, the risk that they currently find themselves in moving forward. So that's a very quick overview of the discussions, but I say the representations and the applications are a fair assessment of where things are currently standing.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark. I'll open it up to councillors Charvey and Oldham. Is there any discussion, debate? Barbara.
Some really helpful comments in the feedback. I'm very grateful at the very short notice, but this is an emergency situation. Also had a lot of verbal comments, some for, some questioning it. You see there's questions raised there, and we need to remember that this is, if we go ahead with this, it is an emergency investment for the community centre that the vast majority realise is a huge asset for Nairn, and for the doors to close would be a much wider impact on the entire community. It's a really high value resource that otherwise would cease to exist. However, this 50,000 ask, going forward, they're needing support to be more sustainable going forward in a long-term picture. And there's helpful comments there, especially from HIE. People are reaching out. People have said to me they would like to help. So maybe volunteer route way to go forward, doing their own fundraisers and crowdfunders, art auctions, lots of ideas, and maybe they're needing a suggestion box in there to take it forward, because they've done really well after COVID. They were going through that, and that actually hit them a lot. So we need to be much to be grateful for to the staff and the board there, but just maybe need a bit more support going forward, and hopefully this is a cushion, but how we do it is the question, I think.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Paul?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you know, I also posted the details of the email out on my blog to get a wider view from the wider community. I had 18 responses. University people are saying that we should be funding the community centre. 3 of them suggested we should do it as a loan, which I noticed some of the people in the formal consultation also are suggesting. I should mention in passing that one person did suggest to me I was criticising the staff of the community centre. Just to be absolutely clear, I'm not criticising the staff. They're doing a grand job. What does concern me is that, as people have already said, we're in a situation where the directors of the community centre were aware they have financial difficulties for really quite some time. And as far as I was concerned, certainly they were in fine condition. In fact, we were invited to support them in a community asset transfer less than 2 years ago, and their accounts certainly suggest that they are financially sound. So I was very disturbed when we heard this news. When I look at the application, the thing that I think concerns me the most is on page 3, where the questions have been asked about how your project will continue beyond the period of support. And the first sentence says the centre requires an external funding subsidy to allow it to continue to operate. Now, that can't come from the Common Good Fund, I don't believe. And frankly, I see no signs of it coming from Highland Council either, from the noises we're getting. So I am concerned, if that is their plan, that is not a viable way forward unless they have some other magical money tree which I'm not aware of. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Some very sensible comments. Likewise, the feedback I've received, which is anecdotal, obviously, has been positive. There's nobody has mentioned a loan. It's just a case of they wish to support the community centre because the community centre sort of going under and all the related activities would struggle to continue at their present level. I think as we look forward, there has to be a review, a feasibility study, which we are providing a window for them to do up to the end of this year, up till December. So they have to effectively put their own house in order. Now, there's many ways they can do this, and there's no silver bullet. But again, like Councillor Jarvie said, I was intrigued, and I think this could be very helpful from HIE, the Third Sector Recovery Service. So that's where the first protocol. There are many other similar organisations which they should be looking at in similar boats, in a similar circumstances to themselves, some a lot more successful. There can be inspiration drawn from there. I know that the Inverness Ice Centre CEO has extended an invitation, and specifically to show them in detail the Friends scheme, which has been very successful through at the ice rink. So it's these type of initiatives that needs to be looked at. But Councillor Oldham raises a very salient point. They must put their own house in order, and that's the important thing. This is a one-off. This is emergency funding to prevent insolvency, to let things continue, but they have to find a solution, and that may lie in a wide area of different. They may get support from a wide range of organisations, but it's very much into the ball is in their court. So as we move beyond that, I think we would come to the recommendations. Now, David, if we're likened to accept the recommendations and following on from which Councillor Oldham had raised a very legitimate point, excuse me, what sort of conditions are attached to the proposed proposals that are in front of us? I'll come to you, Councillor Jarvie, in a minute.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if you would be okay with it, I'm going to share my screens, and that'll be able to explain just what I'm thinking of just now to protect the council's position and allow the matter to proceed at pace. So I'll just share my screen with you.
Yes, I'll come to Councillor Jarvie immediately after that.
Okay. Hopefully you will be able to see. Chair, can you see that document?
Yes,
so
yes.
Great. So if I could introduce these, basically they cover the points raised by you and members in terms of concern. First of all, prior to Councillor Oldham made a particular point about releasing the money, if you were minded to award the maximum of £50,000, the proposal is we would not hand over the money to the applicant. What we would do is, as per condition 1, request that the applicant provide appropriate financial statements that meet our satisfaction in consultation with our finance colleagues. which clearly evidence the requirement for the release of the grant funding to ensure the continuance of essential service provision. Now that means, and the essence of what you just described, and forgive me, by the way, I can't see anyone, so you could shout out, Chair, if you want me to stop at any time to answer any immediate questions.
Okay.
It's about servicing an immediate essential need to allow the centre to function. That's the instruction that's coming through from you, and also very importantly, as you say, from the engagement, the responses from the community engagement group that's been received to date. So we would only release the money if it was properly evidenced that it was required. And the other point to note is, just as been said, this is a one-off. This grant is a one-off, and it's a one-off because you're intimating it to be, and also because this committee has only got a budget for this year, so you couldn't even predetermine at this stage what you would do next year. So that condition 1 gives you that assurance, and it also is very fair to the applicant, because it spells out to the applicant just what they have to do, and we will work with them in that regard. If you're okay, I'll move on to condition 2. Condition 2 is regarding the feasibility study, because on this funding is absolutely there to enable time to be built into the life of the centre, so that not only can they continue their essential work, but also they can find a sustainable way forward. We've already heard some very good feedback from HIE through Councillor Jarvie's response there, and others, that will allow us to progress this very effectively. It's their responsibility to provide a feasibility study that meets our standards. That we won't just leave them in it, as it were. We will work with them on this, but essentially they will need to provide this to the standard we require. And then finally, we've got a end date, and I see there's a typo there, 2024 in the end date for the provision of the feasibility study, which would then be subject to an evaluation report being brought back to this committee, so you could be comfortable with its outcome. It wouldn't be conditional on the money only being released once the study was prepared, but we would be wanting assurance that they were prepared to agree this condition before we started to consider the release of the money. The remaining grant conditions are just generally, as you would expect, we want to see evidence of receipts for expenses, evidence of any funding from other sources. That point about Creative Scotland, we'd work with them in that regard. Acknowledgement of the Nairn Common Good Fund in accordance with promotional guidelines. We'd want to see the whole process completed within 6 months. If they could always come back for an extension if required, and the rest of them are really to promote good governance, etc. So that's the position there, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions. I'll stop sharing my screen just now, but that's the position. I hope you find those use. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. That's appreciated. Is there anybody wish to make comment on this? Paul?
Could you mail us a copy of that, please, David?
I will certainly do that. I will certainly send that out and circulate it to members, yes, if that was your request.
So I'd like a copy now, if that's possible.
Okay, if you can send that. Do you wish to comment further on it, Paul? Do you wish to take a respite for a minute?
I it's very difficult to read what David was talking about. But my attention arousal doesn't work that way, so I just want to sit and actually read it.
Okay.
It seemed fine from first glance, so I can say.
This is a two-pronged approach, that they'll be looking at support from HIE with best practice, looking at best practice elsewhere. And I would maybe take a slightly different view from Councillor Oldham about support. Well, yes, he's correct. There's no support coming at the moment. Longer term, it's a conversation I think that needs to be had on a sort of fair share basis. It's not Nairn that's alone, that community centre wise, that is struggling. A lot of community centres are struggling out with the umbrella of Highland and Highland Council. Many centres in Inverness receive, which are council facilities, the same as the Nairn Community and Arts Centre is a council-owned facility, and they receive a subsidy through their heat and power bills being picked up by the Highland Council. We just look for a level playing field, but that's for a discussion for councillors to have internally and externally. That's a political decision. So on that basis, if there are no other comments, I think we should move to the recommendations. So, sorry, apologies, Barbara, apologies.
Sorry, it's just we need to note that that business plan is a draft, and hopefully with the support with HIE and other expertise that, you know, there can be sort of a bit more new ideas going forward. I'm concerned that staffing isn't mentioned, upskilling the staff and using their talents more and efficiency and things like that. They need more money coming into that building than just a room charge. And looking at that kitchen to make money, it's a huge asset that maybe volunteers could do something there. Could we have feedback coming to the Common Good Engagement Group and as it is Common Good money? I think it's reasonable to have feedback at some point, come back to the Common Good Engagement Group, maybe after the summer come a little summary, see how things are going to the ward meeting, please, just so that all councillors are kept in the picture. That would be, you know, we're responsible for the asset of the common good, as well as trying to do the right thing for Nairn and keep something going.
Okay, thanks, Babs. Some very good points made there. I think it's important that this is not just a paper exercise. They need to embrace the changes in real time. So yes, they need to start working as soon as we end this call, as I'm sure they are. There are many things that they can do and can be done. And I think it's a very good idea to get an interim update from them, whether that's to the engagement group or the ward business meeting, but we should get an update from them to see that they are actually implementing. It's not a case of producing a report for 6 months. This is in real time. You have to have a cultural change in the organisation and embrace best practice everywhere and do every single thing that you can and keep us informed. So happy with that. If there are other comments, Paul, Barbara, anything else? David, sorry, I missed your hand there, David.
Not at all, Chair. Just before you come to the final decision, to point out that, of course, those conditions were prepared before we had knowledge of the intended maximum sum. So we will be very clear in the condition that which are draft at the moment will insert up to a maximum sum of £50,000. So that will be inserted, because now that we know the maximum sum in terms of the provision of the money. And the last point to note is that before we agree to part with any cash, we would refer, we pointed in that, we've done in consultation with yourself as chair prior to us releasing the funds, so you would be brief, but that's up to you, Chair, if you'd like that to stick at that, we can do that, or in consultation with the committee, it's entirely up to you. At the moment, it's in consultation with yourself that the funds would be released. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think in the interest of transparency, I'd prefer Councillor Oldham, Councillor Jarvie and the Provost to be involved. Paul.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I would be a lot more comfortable if I could have 2 or 3 minutes to read these conditions. I'm not very happy that these have come to us at the meeting rather than beforehand. I would just like to be sure in my mind as we're about to agree these conditions that we have read these conditions.
Okay.
Chair, just to say that I'm absolutely I understand that point, Chair. It's always difficult for officers because we didn't want to throw those conditions at you on a presumption that you were going to approve this. Very important, make this a decision, but of course we'll be happy to hold fire as you see fit. Thank you.
Yes, I think we'll take a slight recess here to allow us all to review the conditions. Okay, if we can take 5 minutes, is that 10 minutes? As long as we need, Paul. Okay.
That's fine.
Okay. The thing that I'm would appreciate clarification: are the community centre fully briefed and versed on these conditions, and they've signed up to this? Yes.
The community centre are aware that we're going to be stringent on our requirements before releasing any money. They have not seen these detailed conditions, Chair, and we'll clearly, there's no surprises in there. There's no surprises in there for them at all. They know about the feasibility study, and they also know that we're not going to just hand over the cash without making sure it's needed.
No, I think that's sensible, and they'll be willing to work to those conditions. So on that basis, is there any other comments anybody wishes to make, or we can move to the recommendation? Paul?
Yes, on your second bullet point, it says the terms of which will be subject to prior written approval of the council. Can we clarify what we mean by prior written approval of the council? Who is doing that prior written approval?
Do you want me to come back in, Chair?
Please.
Yeah, it's basically the council being those people who are delegated within the council to make that decision, which is us, you, supported by the officers here. So that's what it means. It doesn't mean it goes to a full council. It means it goes through what the council says the decisions should be made, that process. And the process is here through the Nairnshire Area Committee as you decide.
Sorry, so can I ask, are you saying we need to have another area committee or to approve the feasibility study terms?
No, it's just to be clear, Chair, what I'm suggesting is that a report comes back by the end of the year on the feasibility study. What we will do is keep you, as Councillor Jarvie suggested, properly advised as to the progress of that study. And if the officers felt there was any issue with the terms of reference not being agreed, or we hit any particular stumbling blocks, of course, that may warrant a discussion at committee level. But the plan would be, you know, the terms of reference are clear. We've got to come up with a feasibility study that we're going to keep you posted on, as suggested. And then only if there's a major problem with those terms, we don't see, we're at loggerheads with the applicant in terms of what the terms of reference should be, would we bring it back to the committee? Otherwise, it would just be a case of referring back to you. And I would just, on a point of clarification, Chair, on Councillor Jarvie's point about referencing back to the engagement group, of course, they are very important in this process, and they show their importance in the review that's taken place to date. But of course, we must remember that the decision-making body the decisions rest with you, rest with the members, but you know, it's a point of information and clarity. Thank you.
I think following on from the comments that Paul's made and Barbara's made, it'd be quite refreshing if there was the cultural change at the community centre, if they did come back to us. I think it would be best practice just to update us at the area committee, the area committee at one of our ward business meetings, to come along and just update us. As I say, part of the problem is this sort of sudden nature of this application coming forward out of the blue. So we need to be updated, and we can't wait till December to get back effectively the review of their operations. It needs to happen now. So I'll come to Barbara.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for that, David. Yes, it was just for courtesy for the common engagement group. That group's been set up for a purpose. So just to update on the value that it is a good investment, as it has been supported by many people that are in that group there. And for transparency, and I think it would encourage wider engagement for the centre in the way of getting board members, people to support, maybe doing things on a voluntary basis, ideas. People really need to get in touch with the centre, because as far as I'm aware, they're open to help and ideas. You know, right, point 5 of the conditions, the submission of a completed evaluation form. What type of evaluation is this? Of the process, of the centre, of staff, of the running, or of the study? And is this going to be ongoing, or one at the end of the study, or throughout, that we could maybe get a copy of too, please?
George. Yep.
Yes, thank you,
Shall
David. If you can comment on that, yes.
Certainly. Yeah, the evaluation form basically says that after the purpose of the grant has been exhausted, i.e. the money's been expended, the recipient's got to come back and say, right, tell us what you've done with the money. So that's more than just the feasibility. It's about what improvements have been made, what's actually happened as a result of this money being made available. Yeah, you've got the feasibility study, but what have you actually changed? And it's just good governance to have that. And I'll certainly organise for you to see the evaluation form that we're proposing to use, and I will circulate that to you. I'm certainly happy to do that, Chair. Thank you.
Great, thank you, David. That would be really beneficial.
An important point that's coming through here is communication at many levels is going to be key here. It's communication with their users, it's communication with ourselves, it's communication. There's no point hiding behind a veil of secrecy. I think that's been part of the issue. There are issues and they're now out in the open and we need to discuss them, because we're only going to find a solution to this if everybody's working together. Whether that's effective crowdfunding, who knows where this will lead. But at the end of the day, communication is key to this. So hopefully they've embraced the advice that we're giving them. So if there's no further discussion or clarification required, are we comfortable moving to the recommendation? Paul?
Several of the people that have commented have suggested that we should do this as a loan rather than a grant. And the Councillor Fraser, who is not here, is also of that opinion. So I thought we should at least comment on that. My view, having discussed this with Paul Nevin this morning, is that it opens up all sorts of complications legally. It's not at all clear that there's any mechanism in place. There are legal complications. Certainly Hoyle has particular hoops he has to jump through financially to do a loan at all. So I think although it's an interesting idea, I think my view is it's not tenable.
I would tend to agree there, especially with recommendations from Paul Nevin. There's all sorts of governance issues. I would suggest loaning to a failing institution, and I mean that it can be turned around, and hopefully it will be turned around. But certainly, I think from best practice, the only option available to us is what's in front of us here today. Barbara?
I've actually thought about that a lot, and it's interesting other people that's coming into their mind as well. And looking into it, I think if the intention of the funding is to give as an asset, they actually need more than that. This is why I'm mentioning crowdfunding, using volunteers, using that kitchen, change of direction, and other ideas going in there. I think it would create a burden, giving them a liability as a loan, and it would also go against them applying for funding because it's a liability. It would make that side go up. And really, we want to help, not hinder.
David?
One last point, Chair, and that's just to be clear that the exceptional nature of this application, that this is very much a one-off based on the importance of this centre to the whole of Nairn, and it's not implying that there's any further capacity to entertain applications from other places. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. And I think that they need to know the common good in this instance here is 100% behind them, and we're just awarding the funding to them, not loans. There's technical difficulties, has been raised, and I think in the spirit of what we're trying to support them, it's the right thing to do. So, are we comfortable moving to the recommendation? Yes, okay. So we're asked to consider the application for funding and note the budget agreed at the Nairnshire Committee held on 4th of March 2024 attached in Appendix 2. So are we happy to support the application and agree the application?
Yes.
Yes.
Paul? Yes. Sorry, David, you've something to say?
It was just to make it absolutely clear that is up to a maximum of £50,000 to be made available, strictly subject to the conditions circulated, and to a further updates being provided to members as we move through the process, and also following Councillor Jarvie's point, to the Nairn Common Good Fund engagement group as appropriate, with an evaluation report to be completed by the applicant in due course. And that's it. Thank you.
Yes. No, and I'm fully supportive of the recommendations and agreement to 50,000 limit.
Yeah, and an update to the ward after the summer, please.
Yes.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, thank you again. And thank you, Mark, for your work, and especially pulling in all that community engagement. It was impressive, and thank you for that. And also to the community councils for their response. That was very much, and the various other respondents, very much appreciated. So, okay, thank you, everybody.